This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting today's show is a cattle market update from University of Nebraska-Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis. His conversation covers an in-depth look into the fed cattle market, as well as a discussion on feeder cattle, trade, and the economy. Sarah Lancaster, K-State weed specialist, and Logan Simon, K-State extension agronomist, keep the show rolling as they talk about getting cotton fields ready for planting and things to watch. K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken ends the show as he explains plants being in ponds and whether they are a good or bad thing. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with the cattle market update from University of Nebraska-Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis. Elliott, thanks for joining us today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Elliott, wanting to take a dive into the fed cattle market and beginning with grading and what has distribution been like?
Yeah, so as we starting to see cattle weights continue to rise, or at least in some cases plateau week to week, the big impact has just been grading, primarily on prime cattle. Longer days on feed is strongly correlated with higher cattle quality. So we just see a lot more cattle grading in the prime area at 12%. And so much to the point that we're looking at the total cattle grading prime and select, and they're almost similar. And so you have a ton of cattle grading, prime and choice now, and select is really becoming a minor kind of category. And I think that it has to do a lot of reasons. Genetic improvements is definitely one of them. So, definitely the shout out to the, cow-calf producers who are making that. I think one of the things that's helped that has been genetic testing, and really this focus on, EPDs, and improving and putting those into ways to kind of quantify them, like the dollar index and the dollar beef. These types of indices have helped producers also make, better selection decisions. And then, of course, we can't ever ignore the shift into cattle going onto the grid and formula, people actually getting paid for those premiums and discounts. And I think in large part, we talk about genetics, just like we were at the individual animal for animal health, we really switched from pen level to treating individual animals rather than pen level. I think we started to do that also on performance, trying to treat each animal, not pen level performance, but individual animal performance. And I think prior to genetics and using genetics, that has been really hard. How do you, essentially you're feeding an average weight to the pen or average doneness, which means some animals are probably less done and some animals are overdone. That assumes that you're not doing any terminal sorting at the end. But I think genetics has really helped us kind of fine tune that some animals, to be honest, maybe we're not reaching that genetic potential. And in this cattle market right now, I think we're starting to realize that maybe we were underfeeding cattle pretty significantly. And now that we have kind of production performance with different technologies, like using growth safe technology, where we can actually get individual animal feed intake, performance, we're able to, have basically optimize each individual animal better. And I think that has resulted in, a stronger, more resilient market.
You mentioned weight, and kind of what's that top weight that we've been hitting for finishing cattle? Yeah,
so really when we're looking at kind of finished weights, it's going to vary by steers and heifers, but, steers are, in the 940 range pretty consistently on dressed weights. And when we think about kind of where those discounts are, really most on the premiums and discounts are discounting 75 cents a hundredweight for cattle grading over or dressing over 900 pounds. So for 900 to 1,000. So even though there is a slight discount, it's not very much on average. Some packers aren't even discounting cattle that are over 900 pounds. This has a huge implications on, obviously if you're gridding cattle, this has a big implication. If you're just selling live or dress on negotiated, it doesn't affect you as much because you're just selling, the cattle out there. So yeah, I mean, this distribution of premiums and discounts really is impacting kind of producer decision making. Right now, is those premiums and discounts for heavyweight cattle haven't really changed. We look at yield grade discounts. Everything's zeros until you get to 4s and 5s, and those haven't changed. Those premiums and discounts haven't changed on really fat cattle. So, all of that saying, just continue to feed a little fatter, and plants are having to make the decision between total output of beef out the back door versus total head being killed. And I think that's why you're seeing some plants, go dark one day a week because of the number of, they can't kill as many cattle, but maybe they don't need as much because beef production, is a little bit higher. So just even plants are making trade-offs between number of head and total output through the plant.
As we've seen historic highs when we look at the cattle market, is that changing what cattle producer decisions are being made?
One way that we can really look at that is on the forward contract. How many cattle are being forward contracted in the future? There has not been a huge change, within this year. Normally we would see a slight uptick right now, but the forward contract total number of cattle that are being forward contracted on live or dressed basis haven't really changed. Generally what that would indicate is that people are not, expecting prices to go lower. They're not worried about kind of locking in a price. And so people are just waiting that the markets are continue to appreciate in value. Now, I do think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic about that market. Obviously, when we think about the economy, where the international markets are at, there is some downside in the market. And so just making sure that we have proper risk management. And if we're not, then just know that we're assuming that risk, and we live and die by that.
Elliott, what are we seeing for feeder cattle?
Yeah, on the feeder cattle markets, at least in Nebraska, we have had some excellent weeks. We really rebounded over those last couple of weeks. We're seeing, on average, some of our highest values that we've ever seen. 402 on dollars per hundredweight on 5/6 weights, and 320 on 7/8 weights in Nebraska. Now, those are averages. Some sale barns in Nebraska have been averaging much higher than that. And even on select pens of cattle, they've almost set national highs. And so obviously a lot of optimism. If you're selling your steers or selling your heifers, this is definitely money to be made. People are making retention decisions. I think really have to be penciling out, what are we expecting for future prices and what needs to go right? And similarly, what can go wrong, for this heifer that I'm going to breed, if it's going to actually pay for herself. So need to be really careful there. And we've done some work at UNL with the Center for Ag Profitability, looking at how that Steer-Heifer differential has changed over time, as well as how the price slide has changed by weight, both within this past year and in the 5 and 10 year average. I think we put those out to kind of help people make decisions and kind of recognize that markets are highs, but what is the relationship between the weights doing? Not just say, 5/6 weights are really high. Has the relationship changed over time? So definitely can help in some of the retention decisions and summer grazing. What weights we should be raising them to and putting on weight, supplementing, non-supplementing.
And how has trade looked for the cattle market when we look at April?
Yeah, so the trade numbers will be coming out here. We don't know kind of where we're at on April yet. When we look at kind of the way the fed cattle market was, it'll be really interesting to see these numbers because there was a lot of pessimism in the market right when the reciprocal tariffs came out. The markets just took a nosedive, and really over the last month, the market has recognized for a large extent that maybe they overreacted, and we're at or higher than we were ending April than we were as we were starting it. So who knows? We could have been trading sideways. We could have been trading up a little bit, but the point is that the market has recovered almost entirely from that. And so seeing the trade numbers for our key trading partners like South Korea, Japan, China will be really interesting to see kind of how that has affected it. But the point is that we have premium product here, and the dollar, conversion ratio would really suggest that people still want to buy U.S. beef. And so how much these tariffs have affected total demand, I'm excited to see those numbers, and I think that can really move the market one way or the other.
Elliott, as we overall look at the economy right now, what are you seeing and maybe impact on the cattle market from it?
Yeah, well, on Friday, the jobs report came out. I think it was a little bit of shock to the market. There's been a lot of negativity in the press about the trade, obviously the Doge and kind of what's been going on. And so the fact that, the jobs report came out and said we added more jobs than expected, I think gave the Friday markets a boost going into the weekend. People starting to question whether this is maybe a little bit overblown or not. Is the economy actually strengthening more than we thought? And really, that kind of clashes a little bit with consumer sentiment, which says, people are being a little bit more pessimistic about where the economy is going. So kind of dual or conflicting kind of signals there that consumers saying, I'm maybe a little bit more pessimistic, so I may want to ration some of my purchases, but the economy saying, actually more people are getting jobs, which means more money is flowing through the economy. So we have to wait and see kind of how that sorts out through May. Obviously, that has big implications for beef as it's a premium product and people purchase it. But excited to go into the growing months. Should be a fun summer.
Elliott, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was University of Nebraska-Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis. I will link the resources that he mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Monday show talking about ways to make sure we're giving cotton its best chance with K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster and K-State extension agronomist Logan Simon. Sarah, Logan, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having us, Shelby.
Logan, when we're thinking about putting cotton in the ground, before we even get to planting, it's important to think about burn down, and why is that?
Cotton is just like any other crop that we grow here in Kansas. We really want our producers to be following that policy of starting clean, just because, the realities of following that up, if we are not starting in a good, clean environment, giving cotton its best chance. Cotton isn't always the most aggressive seedling either. And so any sort of competition there early on is going to certainly impact the success of our cotton crops. So starting clean is always going to be our recommendation.
And Sarah, what are your recommendations for getting a good burn down and starting clean?
So some things to think about for herbicides in a burn down program, Shelby. First is kind of that trustworthy glyphosate, right? We put that in a lot of our burn down, a lot of our applications in general. Other products that folks seem to be using quite a bit would be flumioxazin types of products. So that would be things like Valor or any of the other brands that contain flumioxazin. Now, the caveat here is that ahead of cotton, depending on the rate of Valor that you use, you're going to need to make that application of flumioxazin 2 to 4 weeks prior to planting. So that'll give us some burn down activity as well as some good residual activity. Other things to think about for burn down activity, Group 14 products, like there's a product called Reviton that can be applied ahead of cotton. That's a Group 14 product that has no residual activity. Another option would be paraquat. And, we know that there's some restrictions around the safety side of using paraquat. So just other things to think about. Other things that often go in burn down programs that are good for weed control, but potentially problematic for cotton would be things like 2,4-D, right? So something to control those broadleaves, kind of partner with the glyphosate for grass control. The thing about 2,4-D is that there is a plant back restriction there, similar to the glyphosate. So it's a 30-day waiting period unless enlist cotton is being planted. Other things to think about, which maybe folks want to use a Group 15 herbicide in that early season application. So that would be our products like Dual, Outlook, Zidua, or Warrants or Harness a Warrant type of product.
So after hopefully a really successful burn down and having a clean field, Logan, what do growers need to think about when they're getting ready to go in the field?
when it comes to making our planting decisions for cotton, the two primary things that we want our producers to be thinking about are our soil temperatures and then also what our germ rate is on that cotton. In terms of soil temperatures, in Kansas, we use a target soil temperature of 60 degrees. In other portions of the Cotton Belt, they might be more inclined to use a temperature of 65. But this far north, 60 really is the range that we are using to get that cotton in the ground early enough. Right now, across the state, we actually, in the cotton-producing regions of the state, we are seeing a 7-day average soil temperature of 61 degrees. So for soil temperatures, we are right there where we want to be for cotton planting. On the germination side, all of your cotton is going to come with on the bag, a rating for a warm germination rate. We also have what we call a cool germination test that is done for cotton. It is not usually on the bag, but can be requested from your seed dealer. And cool germination tests are especially important in Kansas, where we know we are often putting cotton seed in the ground a little bit cooler than the rest of the Cotton Belt. So when we're prioritizing things in terms of different seed lots, we want to make sure that we are using the highest germ seed first and holding on to some of that especially lower cold germ material until later on in our planting window when we know our soil temperatures are a little bit higher and just giving that cotton its best shot. In addition to soil temperature and germ rate, though, one other thing I want our producers to be thinking about is air temperature. Because although we've got good soil temperatures right now, especially as you move into west in the state, we're still getting some very cold nighttime temperatures. And that is influencing our ability to accumulate what we call degree day 60s. 60 degrees is our base for cotton. And when we're thinking about planting, we really want to be ensuring that we're accumulating enough growing degree days in that 5-day window after planting to be really setting our cotton up in good shape. The ratings that we use is anything less than 10 is going to be very poor, 11 to 15 poor, 16 to 25 marginal, 26 to 50 is good, and greater than 51 is very good. As far as where we are sitting right now, for the week ending on May 2nd, in southwest Kansas, we are sitting at very poor. As you move over into south central Kansas, we're doing a little bit better, but we're still in the marginal range over there. So for folks that have a lot of acres with some really good high germ material, we might be able to see some folks maybe get started if we got a lot of acres to cover, but we really want to wait until we start accumulating those.
On the topic of wanting to give cotton its best chance, important to think about pre-emergence herbicides?
Right, Shelby. We recommend strong pre-emergence herbicide programs for all of our summer cropping systems, and cotton is no exception. Some of the kind of usual suspects is, in terms of products for that scenario would be the group 15 herbicides that I mentioned earlier, so the Warrant or Dual or Outlook or Zidua types of products. One thing to note about Zidua in particular, and this is a little bit of a later season thing, but we like to use those group 15s as layered residual herbicides. And one of the things that's unique about Zidua is that it can be impregnated on dry fertilizer. And so folks are looking to help with their nitrogen management in terms of managing cotton growth. That can be a great way to get some extended activity out of your group 15 products, is to impregnate that Zidua on your dry fertilizer application a little bit later in the season. Other products that can be used at planting with cotton would be things like Cotaran, or other Flumetron products or Caparol. They do have, though, some rotation restrictions that kind of make them less ideal for most of our Kansas cotton as well.
And all of this information is included in previous Agronomy eUpdate articles, which I will link in today's show notes. But one that will be coming out this Thursday involves volunteer cotton and volunteer soybeans. And what issues do we see with those?
What we've been seeing is, especially in south central Kansas, it is very common for cotton to follow soybeans in a wheat double crop soybean cotton rotation. And in past years, the most common practice has been using an extend soybean followed by an enlist cotton where we've got two different technologies that we're able to get control across those two, controlling volunteer soybeans or cotton. Unfortunately, with the loss of our label for over-the-top dicamba, we're expecting those Xtend beans to shift to some other technologies, which could unfortunately include some enlist soybeans. And if we are looking at enlist soybeans followed by an enlist cotton, the real challenge that we face is the risk for volunteer soybeans and cotton, which can be very problematic, not just for yield in cotton, but also the quality. And so we really want producers to be mindful of that. And we have a few control options out there for this circumstance.
So some things to think about in terms of products. The only option that I've been able to find to control volunteer soybeans and cotton, I mean, this is based on research that was conducted at NC State. It looks like a product called Invoke, which is an ALS inhibiting herbicide, could be used. It would be safe on cotton, but but would control the soybeans. The catch there is that when you rotate back to beans, you would need to make sure that you have a soybean variety that is STS or resistant or tolerant of those sulfonylurea herbicide residues.
What about options for controlling volunteer cotton in soybeans?
So that would be things like a product called pyroflufen, which is Vita and ET, some others that can be done, or a product called Cadet, which is the active ingredient fluthiacet. We don't use that a ton. We sometimes joke that it's good at killing velvet leaf, but not a lot of other things. So another thing that folks can consider, Shelby, is to utilize application methods to get some selectivity between the two crops. So one option would be to use a hooded sprayer, or maybe in cotton, a post-directed spray, to get some of that selectivity that way. So some products that have labels for that in either crop would be AIM, Lorox, which is typically considered kind of a cotton product and does have some rotation considerations, or Gramoxone. So those would be options for either crop. In addition, Valor, so those flumioxazin-containing products that we talked about with our burn down applications, they have a label for hooded applications in cotton. So folks do have some more herbicide selections if they have access and are willing to switch their application equipment to a hooded application.
Sarah, Logan, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thanks as always, Shelby.
That was K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster and K-State extension agronomist Logan Simon. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we end our Monday show talking about plants in ponds with K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back.
Joe, what questions have you been receiving about plants being in ponds?
Yeah, this is the time of year when plants really start to show up in high numbers in ponds. And so we're starting to see a lot of plants. People have had maybe a lot of plants in the past, and they're starting to see them, so they kind of want to know, how do I kill them? What do I do about them? And so they want to get out there and they want to kill every plant that they have in their pond. And we're going to talk about maybe it's time to do that and maybe it's not.
What are benefits, though, of plants being in ponds?
Yeah, so the plants are really good for ponds. They serve a lot of really good purposes. One of the main ones is that they feed a lot of different organisms. And so when we think about having really small fish, those really small fish, when they're just being born, just hatching out of their eggs, they're going to eat really small plants called phytoplankton. So really important there. There are some bigger fish that eat different types of vegetation as part of their diet. It feeds other organisms, so it feeds a lot of invertebrates. We've talked about the importance of them in the food webs. Turtles eat a lot of vegetation, so a lot of food is really important for that. Vegetation is also a great place for fish and other aquatic organisms to hang out and have shelter, so it can make houses for them, help protect them so that our fish populations can grow up. And the last thing that I want to point out is that they produce oxygen during the day, and so when they're photosynthesizing, they're giving off oxygen. That's really important to maintain the aquatic life that we have in our ponds. So thinking about fish without oxygen, they wouldn't last very long. And so having something producing oxygen is really important. Those plants use up oxygen overnight. And so you see a daily fluctuation, but it's really important that they replenish that and give off that oxygen during the day.
What's that line between having just the right amount of plants in the pond versus having too many and needing to take care of them?
Yeah, so, that kind of depends on what your goal is. I'm a duck hunter, and I like being out and seeing, lots of vegetation because that means there's going to be more wildlife there and more chances for animals to show up. So I'm a little bit more tolerant. Other folks see vegetation and think it's really ugly. So if you're looking at it every day, a golf course is a great example. A lot of vegetation there probably wouldn't be very good. So it depends on the user, but the rule of thumb is somewhere around 25% of your pond. When you start getting more than that 20 to 25%, there can start to be some issues with it. So it's up to you, but that's kind of a good rule of thumb for where we might want to stay.
Why and how can people take care of too many plants being in their ponds?
There are a lot of reasons we have too many plants, and so that's usually an indication of some other problem going on. So too many nutrients might be a good example, too much sunlight from it being shallow. If you have too many plants, it's important that you first take as many of those plants out of the system as you can. So getting a rake or getting a net if it's floating like duckweed. They make products like parachute skimmers and weed raisers, so you can buy something specifically for it. But getting as much of that plant material out of the pond as you can is really important. And that's because ponds are closed systems. So if we just kill the plant and let the plant decay at the bottom of the pond, it's going to break down and release those nutrients, and that'll allow more plants to grow. So it's important that we first pull as many out. Then we can use herbicides if we want to as a tool to help us control them further.
What's really important when it comes to killing off those plants that people need to keep in mind?
Yeah, a couple things. So using an aquatic safe herbicide, if you don't use an aquatic safe herbicide, it's illegal. And it can also damage the pond for a really long time and kill all your fish. So not a good thing. You want to make sure that it's labeled for aquatic use. And then making sure that you know what plant you're trying to control with that herbicide. Aquatic herbicides are very specific for what they'll treat, much more specific in general than terrestrial herbicides. So it's important that you know what plants you have so that you can know which herbicide to use and how to control it.
Is now the time to take care of it?
Yeah, so now is definitely time to get out before your plants grow way out of control. While they're first starting to green up, you can get out now and start treating your plants and keep them under control in your pond.
And something else you've been receiving a lot of questions on, grass carp, and how can people hear more about that?
Grass carp can be a great tool. We'll talk about that more on our next episode of Fins, Fur, and Feathers, and I'm sure you'll share that here as well. So check that out to get more information.
Joe, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
That was K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.